Hello. May I invite you all to start, please? May I invite Dr. Mohammed Aid-Kadi to come to the podium? May I invite Peter Blazar to come to the podium, please? Please, Peter. Yeah. Next to. Yeah. Let me take this. Yeah. May I invite His Excellency Inia Seruratu to come to the podium. And let me invite also Ankit Kawatra to come. Kit, let me. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I am pleased to welcome you all to the Agricultural Action Day. We are gathered here today to discuss agriculture-based climate solutions. As we all know, the impacts of climate change pose severe threats to our food systems worldwide. The agricultural sector is more exposed to the effects of climate change than any other economic sector. Agriculture bears over 80% of the economic impacts of droughts. Hardest hit are the smallholder and family farmers, pastoralists, fishing and forest communities, who provide the bulk of our planet's food. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change estimates that climate change might further increase the risk of hunger and malnutrition by up to 20% by 2050. At the same time, agricultural land use changes contribute up to a quarter of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. In the case of methane, agriculture is even responsible for about half of anthropogenic emissions. It is clear that without quick and effective climate solutions, our goals of reaching zero hunger, eradicating poverty. I welcome Minister Inia from Fiji. Please, Minister, next to the young guy. It is clear that without quick and effective climate solutions, our goals of reaching zero hunger, eradicating poverty, and combating climate change will be increasing out of reach. We need quick and drastic actions to transform our food system into more sustainable, climate resilient, and climate smart ones. Today, we will showcase and discuss successful agricultural-based climate solutions. Climate solutions that can and should be scaled up to contribute not only to climate change mitigation, but also to help us, and especially the poorest of the earth, adapt and build resilience to climate change. Such adaptation and resilience to climate change is particularly important in a small island developing states, the seas. Seas are severely affected by changing rainfall patterns, drought, and a growing intensity of cyclones like we have seen in the last few months. The majority of seeds are also coping with multiple forms of malnutrition. Effective climate action in the agricultural sector is therefore particularly needed in seeds. I am glad to welcome Inia Seruratu, Minister of Agriculture, Rural and Maritime Development and National Disaster Management of Fiji, which holds COP23 presidency, who will tell us more about the particular climate change that seeds such as Fiji are dealing with. I am also proud to welcome today Mohammed Aid-Kadi, from the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries of Morocco and President of the Agricultural Board, and Peter Blazar, Permanent Secretary to the Parliament of the Federal Minister of Food and Agriculture of Germany. These three ministries will help us set the scene for today. They will provide their valuable insights on the road from COP22 to 23 and into the future. I am particularly happy to have in our midst today young people active in the agricultural sector. Far too often, climate actions are taken without the engagement of the people that actually matter, the people on the ground who makes a difference in their indirect surroundings. In this opening, the remarkable young man Ankit Kawatra, founder of Feeding India, and young leader for the Sustainable Development Goals, will give a short talk about the challenges of climate change for agriculture in the next generations. Throughout the day, young people active in the agricultural sector will follow the event and give us their perspective on the present agricultural-based climate solutions at the closing of this Agricultural Action Day. So without further, let me welcome you. Welcome, please, Dr. Mohammed Eid Kadi, President of the General Council of Agriculture Development, representing His Excellency Aziz Hakamadouche, Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries of Morocco, and invite him to give a keynote speech. Please, note that Morocco held the COP22 presidency. Note that he was speaking in the agricultural event in COP22, and he's a good friend of FAO. Please, Mohammed, come.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful for the opportunity to speak in this panel, and I would like to thank FAO and its partners for the kind invitation. I would like also to convey Mr. Aziz Hakamadouche, Minister of Agriculture, Fishery, Rural Development and Forestry. He would have loved truly to be here today, but he couldn't due to unforeseen government duty. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Morocco has built COP22 held in Marrakesh as the COP of action, translating progress achieved in COP22 in Paris in concrete terms, and the COP for Africa, providing a unique opportunity to showcase actions for and in Africa, bearing in mind that vulnerability and adaptation are issues of high priority. COP22 was for agriculture a landmark, and I dare to say a historical COP, as the Marrakesh Proclamation explicitly refers to agriculture. The proclamation states, I quote, "We, heads of states, governments, and delegation, gathered in Marrakesh on African soil, call for all parties to strengthen and support efforts to eradicate poverty, ensure food security, and to take stringent action to deal with climate challenges in agriculture." End of quote. Hence, Marrakesh Proclamation has opened the door for more adaptation in the agriculture sector. The willingness to address agriculture and food security finally appears to be bearing some impact. By including food security and agriculture in Marrakesh Proclamation, the international community fully acknowledges that urgent attention is needed to preserve the well-being and future of those who are on the front line of climate change threats and impacts. This is a game changer for the 240 million African people still suffering from chronic hunger and the 80% of the continent's poor who live in rural areas and earn their income via agriculture sector. Already vulnerable to erratic weather patterns, Africa is the continent least able to meet the costs of adaptation to climate change and needs access to the technologies and funds to exploit its massive agricultural development potential. For these reasons, we were strongly convinced that COP22 in Marrakesh was the right moment to create a delivery system to drive forward implementation of agricultural interventions in Africa. The Adaptation of African Agriculture Initiative, AAA, originates from this conviction. It was launched by Morocco to enable African agriculture to simultaneously improve productivity, reduce vulnerability, increase resilience, and manage natural resources more sustainably. It is closely aligned to realizing the ambitions agreed in COP21 and associated finance commitment. The AAA initiative echoes the commitments made under the Comprehensive African Agricultural Program, CADEP, as articulated in the Maputo and Malabo Declaration, as well as the Dakar African Development Bank High-Level Conference and the Abidjan FAO Declaration 2016, calling for the transformation of African agriculture into a globally competitive, inclusive, and business-oriented sector that creates wealth, generates gainful employment, and improves quality of life. It also seeks to bring to scale existing and successful initiatives across Africa. I would like also to emphasize that the AAA initiative will contribute to achieving sustainable development goals as its potentials are geared to most of the SDGs. We are gratified by the fact that the AAA is now high in the political agenda, especially since Morocco rejoined the African Union. The initiative enjoys today the support of a large number of African countries, international and regional organizations and financing institutions, the private sector, and the NGOs. It is also supported by a high-level international scientific committee, drawing on expertise from the most renowned research and academic institutions worldwide. To maintain the momentum that the AAA initiative has achieved and to deliver on the high expectations that have been set as a result of success today, we are very conscious of the paramount importance to demonstrate tangible results quickly. As we reported yesterday in the AAA side event, we are engaged with 13 partner African countries, providing support for capacity building, support for the development of country-level strategic plans for agriculture sector adaptation and transformation, and support for the development of specific projects at country level in the 4 areas covered by the AAA: and soils management, water management, risk management, and the innovative agricultural finance. We plan to develop a technology platform to match country-level projects with funders and partners. I take this opportunity to express our deepest appreciation to FAO, World Bank, African Development Bank, the French Development Agency, AFD, for their continued support to this collective endeavor. Mr. President, we share with you the motto, further, faster, together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, dear friend, Mohammed, for the hope and the message of wisdom. Let me now welcome His Excellency Peter Blaizar, Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister. Peter, the floor is yours.
Sehr geehrter Herr Generaldirektor, Vizegeneraldirektor der FAO, lieber Herr Castro, sehr geehrter Minister Serioatu, lieber Herr Kawatra und lieber Aid Kadidi, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, ich freue mich sehr, hier in Bonn Sie zu dem Landwirtschaftstag der FAO im Rahmen der Weltkonferenz COP23 begrüßen zu können. Bonn ist nicht nur ein wichtiger Sitz der Vereinten Nationen, des Klimasekretariats und Standort des Europäischen Forstinstitutes, sondern auch der erste Sitz meines Hauses, des Bundesministeriums für Ernährung und Landwirtschaft. Sie tagen also an einem Ort, der prädestiniert ist, sich um internationale Fragen des Klimaschutzes sowie der Land- und Forstwirtschaft zu kümmern und darüber zu diskutieren. Meine Damen und Herren, Land- und Forstwirtschaft sind wesentliche Elemente, wenn es um die Ziele des Klimaübereinkommens in Paris geht, nämlich um nachhaltige Entwicklungsziele der Vereinten Nationen, SDGs, und diese zu erreichen. Landwirtschaft ist kein Selbstzweck, sondern die Grundlage unserer Ernährung. Und ich sage es in meinen Veranstaltungen immer sehr deutlich: Ohne Landwirtschaft wäre niemand von Ihnen hier. Das müssen wir immer wieder im Blick behalten, wenn es um Beiträge unserer Bauernfamilien zum Klimaschutz geht. Sehr geehrter Herr Minister Serioatu, ich freue mich, dass die Fidschi-Präsidentschaft den Mut und die Energie hat, sich der Herausforderung der COP23-Präsidentschaft zu stellen. Herzlichen Dank dafür. Meine Damen und Herren, anlässlich des Welternährungstages am 16. Oktober hat Papst Franziskus in Rom an die Welt einen eindringlichen Appell gerichtet. Ich zitiere: Es ist ganz offensichtlich, dass Kriege und klimatische Veränderungen die Ursache von Hunger sind. Also lasst uns nicht darstellen, als sei Hunger eine unheilbare Krankheit. Ende des Zitats. Diesen Appell des Papstes fühlt sich die Bundesregierung bei der Ausgestaltung der Ernährungs- und Landwirtschaftspolitik verpflichtet. Wenn ich mit den Bauern und Forstleuten in Deutschland, Europa, aber auch in der ganzen Welt spreche, dann erfahre ich, Land- und Forstwirtschaft sind bereit, ihren Anteil und ihren Teil an der Verantwortung zu tragen. Schon aus eigenem Interesse Kaum ein Wirtschaftszweig ist so stark vom Klimawandel betroffen wie die Landwirtschaft. Dürre, Frost, Stürme oder Starkregen zerstören Ernten, vernichten ganze Lebensräume und gefährden so Ernährungssicherheit weltweit. Gleichzeitig spielt der Agrarsektor eine zentrale Rolle bei der Umsetzung des Weltklimavertrages, denn er ist bislang der einzige Sektor, der Treibhausgase speichern kann. Deshalb sage ich ganz klar, die Klimaziele erreichen wir nur mit der Land- und Forstwirtschaft und nicht gegen sie. Ich sage es auch noch deutlicher, die Landwirtschaft ist zwar auch Teil des Problems, aber sie ist noch größerer Teil der Lösung. Meine Damen und Herren, nach Angaben der Vereinten Nationen werden wir 2050 fast 10 Milliarden Menschen auf der Erde sein. Die Landwirtschaft ist damit der Ernährung einer wachsenden Weltbevölkerung verpflichtet. Die Bekämpfung des Hungers ist ihre vornehmste und vorrangigste Aufgabe. Das hat die Staatengemeinschaft in den Sustainable Development Goals sehr deutlich beschrieben und als Ziel 2 definiert. Auch die Präambel des Pariser Klimaübereinkommens räumt die Ernährungssicherung hohe Priorität ein. Wir dürfen nicht den Fehler begehen, Landwirtschaft und den Klimaschutz gegeneinander auszuspielen. Sie gehören zusammen. Wir müssen ehrlich miteinander sein und anerkennen, dass Lebensmittel nicht mit Nullemissionen zu erzeugen sind. Wir haben die ethische, moralische Verpflichtung, in Gunstregionen die Flächen nachhaltig für die Ernährungssicherung zu nutzen. Es geht darum, möglichst klimaschonend zu arbeiten. Und es geht auch darum, gemeinsam zu handeln, um Klimaschutz und Ernährungssicherung in einem fairen Ausgleich zusammenzubringen. Und ich glaube, das geht nur mit modernster Technologie, die umweltschonend eingesetzt wird. Meine Damen und Herren, essentiell für gemeinsames Handeln sind neueste wissenschaftliche Erkenntnisse, die allen Akteuren zur Verfügung stehen. Deshalb freue ich mich, dass unser Ministerium über den bilateralen Treuhandfonds ein Projekt anstoßen wird, in dem die FAO eine Wissensplattform im Bereich Landwirtschaft und Klima entwickelt. Diese soll es den Partnerländern ermöglichen, sich über Maßnahmen im Bereich der Landwirtschaft zur Anpassung an den Klimawandel und zur Minderung des Klimawandels auszutauschen. Mit 500.000 € werden wir die Arbeit unterstützen. Das unterstreicht die Rolle Deutschlands als verlässlicher Partner der FAO. Meine Damen und Herren, auch unsere Bäuerinnen und Bauern sind Betroffene von Klimakatastrophen. Wir müssen daher jetzt miteinander die Weichen stellen, um in Zukunft unbeherrschbare Folgen des Klimawandels zu verhindern. Miteinander, das heißt mit Landwirten, Wissenschaftlern, Politik und Zivilgesellschaft, müssen wir an tragfähigen Lösungen arbeiten, wie Klimaschutz und Landwirtschaft in Einklang zu bringen sind. Dieses Miteinander wünsche ich mir in der COP23-Beratung. Ihren Events mögen hierzu ein guter Beitrag sein. Ihre Events mögen hierzu ein guter Beitrag sein. Und ich hoffe, dass die Veranstaltung hier in Bonn, in Deutschland, ein weiterer Meilenstein dafür ist, dass wir einem besseren Klimaschutz dienen können. Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Peter Blazer, to remind us that hunger is a crime to basic human rights. Thank you to remind us that agriculture is part of the solution to the climate change challenge. Let me now introduce His Excellency, Inia Seruiratu, Minister for Agriculture, Rural and Maritime Development and National Disaster Management of Fiji. Please, I invite you to give a keynote speech. Remember that Fiji is the COP23 presidency. Please, Minister, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Bulvinaka, Guten Morgen, and a very good morning to you all. As the high-level champion for global climate action and on behalf of the Fiji COP presidency, I warmly welcome you to the Agriculture Action Day. I'm very happy to be here this morning at the opening of the Global Climate Action Agriculture Day. We are gathered at an important moment in the international response to climate change. We have just been informed that 2017 was one of the hottest years on record. We are seeing more severe and frequent natural disasters and extreme weather events. From the devastating hurricanes in the Caribbean to the droughts in sub-Saharan Africa and the flooding in South Asia, we are already feeling the impacts of climate change across the globe, and this is just the beginning. As the Minister for Agriculture in a small, vulnerable island state, I am acutely aware of the challenges brought about by climate change to our agriculture sector. Climate change is already affecting our agriculture systems, our food production, our local diet, our local livelihoods, our national economy, and our way of life. Sea level rise is driving coastal erosion and washing away of arable land and backyard home gardens. Our coastal communities are forced to plant their daily food supply a distance from their home, placing extra burden to our women. We are experiencing more intense floods, causing large-scale loss to our local economy and depriving our local farmers and rural communities of their main source of income. Seasonal and climatic variability are causing changes in the timing of life cycles, in migration patterns, in breeding, and in flowering. This is creating havoc among our farmers who rely on traditional cropping calendars to guide their planting and harvesting seasons. These traditional calendars are no longer relevant. We are working with our farming communities to respond. We are supporting them to identify the climate risks they face and adopt new varieties of crops that are more resilient to drought, salinity, flooding, and extreme temperatures. And I am confident that our farming communities can adapt if given the right tools and skills and resources. However, what we really need to do is to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement and contain global temperature rise in order to prevent further damaging impacts. But this is not the course we are currently on. This points to an inescapable conclusion that the world simply must do more to address climate change. But we have cause for optimism. And in my time as high-level champion, I have seen promising trends everywhere I look. One of these trends brings us here today. There is growing recognition that agriculture and land use can and must be a central part of the solution to climate change. Your presence in this room is a testament to this fact. We will only achieve the aims of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda if we scale up climate action in agriculture and land use. Ladies and gentlemen, the Marrakesh Partnership was launched in recognition that national governments alone cannot achieve the Paris goals. Success will depend on concerted action from all levels of government, the private sector, and civil society. This is certainly true of climate action in agriculture. The key to transforming the way we manage land, grow food, and feed our world lies with the world's farmers, rural communities, and the private sector. This has been a key focus during my time as high-level champion and in support of the Marrakesh Partnership. The prominence of agriculture, ladies and gentlemen, and land use under the Marrakesh Partnership is mirrored by a strong focus on these sectors at COP23. Numerous side events are highlighting the transformational potential of these sectors. The high-level roundtables on climate action and SDG 2 will shine a light on the need for climate action to achieve a world with zero hunger. And the interesting events planned here today will allow us to share lessons and insights on a range of important issues. We will learn more about the potential to mitigate climate change through livestock and soils. We will hear about concrete experiences from the field on how data and technologies can be used to support farmers with climate change adaptation. We will learn about the challenges of water scarcity in agriculture and the urgent need to reduce food and loss and waste throughout our food systems. I look forward to these discussions and hope to draw on these insights for the benefit of our agriculture sector in Fiji and the Pacific, and to also guide my work as champion to emphasize the urgency to scale up climate action in this very important sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to close with a reminder of why we are gathered here. This is not about the climate, more so than any other sector. When we talk about agriculture, we are talking about people, about farming communities trying to earn a living and families trying to feed their children. Let us not lose sight of this. Let us unite for climate action, further, faster, together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Inia, to raise the voice for the small island developing states and the world, especially coming from countries that are the ones suffering first the consequences of climate change. We are seeing some of the seeds complaining that they are disappearing as nations. And still you raise the voice for the hunger of the world, for the farmers of the world, and not only for the small island development states. Thank you very much for this moral example. Let me welcome now Ankit Kawatra, who is a United Nations Young Leader for the Sustainable Development Goals and the founder of Feeding India, a network of over 2,000 volunteers in 28 cities in India, rescuing and redistributing excess food to help feed people in need. Ankit, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you for this great opportunity. Excellencies, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls, a very good morning to all of you, and thank you for coming. What I find most interesting when I look at agriculture is how far we've come as a planet, how we've actually created a food system and an agricultural system where we're now able to put food for at least most people on the planet. Today, a crop which is grown and harvested in an Asian land in the morning is sold in an American supermarket in the evening, and that's the level of progress we've made. But even as we've built this platform for the most fundamental commodity in the world, food, there are a lot of systematic gaps, a lot of broken linkages which exist in the supply chain system, which account for the food loss and wastage, and which ultimately result in problems creating climate change problems. Increasing overdependence on a natural ecosystem. Agriculture, as we already know, has proven to have negative consequences on the climate conditions of our world. A major factor of these greenhouse gas emissions are now coming from agriculture-based activities, including livestock activities. An additional 8% of these greenhouse gas emissions coming from food loss and wasted alone. And what I find ironic completely is how agriculture at one end is creating the problem, and at the separate and another end is actually suffering from the consequences of the problem it's creating on its own. And climate change is having a devastating effect on farming and agricultural-based activities in terms of, and resulting in terms of unprecedented and completely difficult to forecast rainfall and floods, which are really tough for agricultural farmers to predict. It's increasingly tough to make decisions related to what to harvest and where to harvest, when to harvest. And this has resulted in a series of gaps in people who are not able to earn a living anymore out of agricultural-based systems that we've created on our own. But while we have these gaps, the silver lining is that, and the two things I really want to talk about, is that people want to bring change. And I feel that there is hope, and the fact that there are people together on ground who want to bring a change together. And I draw this from my own personal experience. When I was 22 a couple of years back, I saw food for 10,000 people being wasted in a wedding in India. And I couldn't help but think about what would happen if that food was used to solve hunger and divert that from landfills. And what started as a movement called Feeding It has now, 3 years later, in 55 cities, an army of 8,000 people who are responsible citizens who are spreading awareness and at the same time diverting food worth $7.5 million from going to landfills. I feel that people want to make change. They want to be empowered, and they want to know how they can bring that change, especially young people. We have more young people than ever before on this planet. And these people are the bearers of the consequences of the solutions that we propose today. I feel that in the coming time, and as we propose solutions, we must account for civil society. We must account for young people and how they will be affected by these changes that we enact on today. And lastly, I must talk about, and my speech would be completely incomplete without talking about the most unappreciated, uninformed, unaware, unrepresented category of people and community in our world, which are the farmers, which right now are not getting what they truly deserve. Farming today and agriculture today represents poverty. It represents hardship. And if you think about it, it's a bed of what creates food for us for the next meal we have. Farming is represented by poverty, and that's ironic. And what we must do is we must create a system not to make agriculture sexy, really, but maybe ensuring that these farmers who are creating the food at least have a basic source of living to feed their families. They're looking for smart practices. They're looking for smart farming techniques to look at what to harvest, when to harvest, looking at how to increase crop production within their old yields. And we must absolutely take farmers as not bearers of these burden of change that we propose today, but as solutions of change, as agents of change, who have the power to put actions into the words that we're proposing today. And so today, as I stand before you, I bear with you this call from these millions of farmers who are hidden, whose voices are not heard in this room today, and who are waiting for help, who are waiting for us to take action and finally get help to them, and not in the form of government regulations which are riddled with the corruption roots which are prevalent today. They're waiting that while they're providing food on our tables, they're able to provide food on theirs. And we must take into account their contribution on this effort. I believe that the COP23 is a reinstatement of how we're getting together to answer that call. And as I look around, I feel there's no dearth of diversity of perspective. There's no dearth of talent and intellect in this room. There's absolutely no dearth of experience. What we must do in the coming days and meetings and conferences is get together to talk about on-ground solutions which not just take into account state and non-state actors, but civil society, young people, and most importantly, the farmers who bear the food that we create. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Immediately after this, in this very same room, we're going to start talking about solutions. And we will be talking about low-carbon livestock immediately. Is that possible, low-carbon livestock? Can we produce our food better with lower carbon intensity with profit for the farmers. Then we will discuss integrated landscape management. And then in parallel, managing water scarcity for agriculture. Then soil organic carbon. What is that issue of the carbon on the soil? Why are we worried for the permafrost carbon? And then why climate data is important for agriculture? Why FAO is engaged now in providing agro-meteo information to the 70 countries of the world that has no agro-meteo information today? And then climate smart agriculture, even a source book will be presented today. And globally important agricultural heritage systems. How people in 18 countries has combined their traditional knowledge of producing food, culture, social networks, and making a living. And then we will talk about mountains and vulnerability of the mountains to climate change. And finally, we will try today to answer the question, are we going to be able to feed 10 billion people few years from now? And to do it by increasing 50% of the production, reducing food waste, loss after harvest, reducing inefficiencies, because we need to reduce carbon emissions per capita from the average of about 5 tons per capita of today, 8 in Europe, for example, 17 in the US, from those levels to 1 ton per capita, which is what the atmosphere can sustain. 10 billion people, 1 ton per capita. We think it is doable. Please share with us in this very same room immediately, because there is no time to waste. This is Germany. Immediately, how we're going to do it in the livestock, which is supposed to be one of the most challenging sectors. Thank you, everyone. Mohammed, Peter, Inia, and Ankit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I wish you well. You too. Thank you. You stay.
I stay.
Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin the next session on low-carbon livestock immediately. I think the next event following this begins at 12:15, so we have about an hour and a quarter to get through an hour and a half session. For those who don't know me, my name is Hayden Montgomery. I'm the representative of the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases, and I have the privilege of moderating this next session. To begin, I would like to invite our distinguished panelists to the podium. First of all, our special guest, Thomas Pesquet, is a European astronaut of French nationality, and this is the first time I've been able to say this in any introduction, recently returned from outer space, from a 6-month mission aboard the International Space Station. Joining Thomas will be René Castro, the Assistant Director General of FAO, who we've recently heard from in the opening session, Anne Mottet, Livestock Development Officer from the FAO, who's an agronomist working in the field of sustainable livestock development. Welcome, Anne. Fabiana Alves from Embrapa, Brazil, the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation. Fabiana has a strong scientific background and academic career in sustainable livestock development. And finally, for the opening panel, Mr. Mark Sadler, if he's here. There he is, from the World Bank and responsible for climate fund management. Now, if I'm not mistaken, to open this session, we'll have a short video, and then we'll invite Thomas to make some reflections. Thank you.
My name is Thomas Pesquet, and I lived in outer space for 196 days. For me, it was the most profound, life-changing experience. Being so far away and isolated, I needed to share what I saw with those I love most. Our beautiful planet provides us with everything we need to grow food and live healthy lives. But climate change and extreme weather are putting everything at risk, damaging agriculture and destroying the livelihoods of those who grow our food. Every day, 815 million people go to bed on an empty stomach, and we still waste 1/3 of all the food we produce. My journey in space made me realize even more that we need to stand together and act now. We only have one Earth, and every action counts. Do your part to achieve zero hunger.
Thomas, would you like to provide some reflections from what it's like to watch us from out there and how fragile this planet is from so many miles away? Thank you. You can take the podium or from the chair, as you wish.
All right, hi everyone, thanks for coming. So as you saw in the video, my name is Thomas Pesquet. I had the privilege of spending 196 days on the International Space Station from November of last year to June of this year. So on the ISS, my mission is all about research. We use the ISS as a platform which enables discoveries that couldn't be made on the ground in so many different domains: medicine, technology, material science, physics, biology. There's a few experiments on the climate and earth science, but by far and large, it's not the majority. ESA, on the other hand, the European Space Agency, is a major actor of Earth observation. And of all the climate variables, as you very well know, more than half are observable only from space. So sea level, sea temperatures and currents, greenhouse gases, the ozone, cloud cover, land use, land humidity, you name it, they're all measured from space. But what we do have on the space station, however, that the satellites don't have, is that we have a window on the world. We're in a very special position. We're in a position to observe the Earth and to take a step back, 450 kilometers altitude for 6 months. It's an incredibly vantage point, and most of the astronauts, they experience what is being called the overview effect. And what does that mean? It just means that some of the phenomena, if not all of them, that are happening on Earth, like climate change, happen on such a global scale that it's really, really difficult to encompass them from here. You can understand them, you can reason, you can do math, it's all meaningful, but you can't really experience them. And when you go to space, you have this huge step back, and suddenly you can experience them with your feelings. You can see them happening in real time. So you're being given a chance, if you want to look, to experience them firsthand. So one striking fact is how fragile the Earth looks like. From here on the ground, it can seem very permanent and too big to be harmed almost, but from space, I guarantee you, it's incredibly fragile. It's just a big blue ball, a blue oasis of life, and there's just nothing around. It's emptiness, darkness for millions of light years. What struck me as first as well is how thin and fragile the atmosphere looks like you can see on that picture on the upper right corner. This is everything. This is the difference between life and death for all of us. All of us. And it's incredibly fragile. It's thin. It looks like a balloon, like it could be punctured any time. And this is all we have to take care of us and to protect us from the hardships of space. So, and then I started to look out the window. And on a global scale, when you look at continents, you can see different landscapes. You can see the seas, you can see the deserts, you can see the forest, you can see lakes, and you can see just a huge diversity of our planet's landscape. And then I started looking closer. And when you look closer, you could distinguish the rivers, their deltas, lakes, and sometimes natural boundaries, sometimes administrative boundaries. And then I took an even closer look. And by zooming in one step further, I could clearly see cities, regional areas, man-made structures like the Suez Canal that you can see on the right of that picture. And I started to understand how the human activity, and very often agriculture, shaped the landscape they belong to. At my maximum level of magnification, you can see the pyramids right there in the middle of this picture. I was clearly seeing fields, individual fields, roads, structures, almost all the details of man's use of their environment. And I was just like that, constantly traveling between a global scale where I could see the huge phenomenon and a very local scale where I could see man's impact on its environment almost at an individual level. I could, unfortunately, also witness the destructive power of nature. There was a few hurricanes during my mission in the Caribbean, but not only in some of the areas of the world as well. Too often, I could see the negative impacts of man's use of its environment, of man activities. I could see pollution in the river deltas. In the river deltas, I could spot forest clearings in the Amazon along the rivers. All this is clearly visible from the International Space Station. In some areas, I started to question the use of land. Some areas are very irrigated, like on this picture in Arizona, in a desert. In some of the places, there's no irrigation at all whatsoever, and I started wondering why. I could see the very distinctive patterns of agriculture along the riverbeds in some dry areas. In some other areas, agriculture was almost at an industrial level, with huge fields extending as far as the eye could see. So during the entire mission, I grew more and more sensitive to the environment and the protection of our home planet. I had in my luggage a copy of the Paris Agreement that I took with me as a symbol that the role space has to play in the protection of the Earth. Also, I was speaking daily on the IP phone with someone that is very close to me and is sitting right here working for FAO. And we started discussing the actions being taken on the ground, and I was questioning, comparing what I was seeing daily to what was being done. And as she was traveling all around the world with FAO, Africa, Asia, Europe, to try and implement some very concrete solutions, we constantly had this back and forth. And I wanted to reconcile my vision of the planet and the problems I could see with what was being done on the ground. So this is really the reason of my presence today here at COP23. First of all, I want to testify the fragility of the Earth. It's something to understand it, but believe me, to see it with your own eyes, it makes you realize in a very, very strong way how fragile the Earth is and how much we need to protect it. And secondly, I want to confront my vision and what I saw from the space station to all the initiatives being taken on the ground. And I want somehow to challenge what people are doing, what the FAO, what other agencies, what all the stakeholders are doing. I want to initiate a healthy discussion and urge people to do even more. Thank you.
Merci, Thomas. The next speaker will be Mr. René Salazar, the FAO Assistant Director General. René, the floor is yours.
Excuse me, Thomas, but I have to go out of the script with the little description you just did. You know, he mentioned, like, in a second, when Anne was doing her work out there in Ethiopia, I was communicating with her from the International Space Agency, and we shared what she was doing in the field, and I was seeing in the International Space Station. And then they talked when she was in Panama or somewhere else. And that's also why we invited them here. Not to share a love story, which is good in itself, but also it's important what is happening in the field and what can we see as the trends at the global level, that you can even see them, picture them, monitor them. And this is part of our work at FAO. And thank you for sharing your personal. I'm sorry to expose you, but I think this is also relevant for the people to know. Yes, our planet is fragile, and climate change affects agriculture. And livestock are key to food security and nutrition, providing 34% of global protein and a wide range of essential nutrients and other goods and services. But hundreds of millions of small livestock keepers and pastoralists already suffer from the impact of droughts, floods, and other climate shocks. Ladies and gentlemen, since the beginning of agriculture, domestic animals have turned resources that humans can use directly into food, energy, fertilizer, and money. But today, the demand for meat, milk, and eggs is exceeding what can be produced without putting significant pressure on natural resources. Indeed, the livestock sector is the largest user of agricultural land with pastures and feed crops. Livestock emit more greenhouse gas than most other food sources. In particular, ruminants contribute to 30% of total anthropogenic methane emissions, a gas that traps more heat than carbon dioxide after it is released into the air. Some people say about 21 times. Today, there is a highly polarized debate around livestock production and consumption. The debate focuses on the role of livestock products in achieving food security and healthy diets, while managing sustainably natural resources and tackling climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, FAO is working on solutions. Low-carbon livestock production is possible. We are encouraged by progress made in many parts of the world. It's important to stress that there are co-benefits between adaptation and mitigation in the agricultural sector. Efficiency gains to reduce emissions intensity, as well as carbon sequestration in soils, contribute to enhance resilience to climate shocks. Today, we will hear about these solutions and from examples of how they are applied in practice. FAO is helping countries achieving low-carbon livestock by generating knowledge, developing tools and protocols, piloting projects, and facilitating multi-stakeholder partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 13 years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and a similarly short time frame to stabilize global average temperature to safe levels as requested by the Paris Agreement. Can we do it? 92 developing countries have included livestock in their national determined contributions, the NDCs. And 78% of the NDCs are linked to the SDG 2 of ending hunger. It's time to act. And developing low-carbon and climate-resilient livestock is a fundamental part of the solution. Today, the policy dialogue on this debate can help to find the right place for livestock in achieving healthy diets for all in changing climate. From these people, I've been learning that is possible. You will hear from them challenges, ideas, projects, examples. Let's take advantage to question them if we have the time. Thank you.
Thank you, René. So we've heard recently that 92 developing country NDCs include livestock. So now let's hear what the options are for these countries in order to actually reduce emissions. So I'd now like to invite Anne Mottet to give us a presentation on low carbon livestock. What are the options? Anne, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much. So I'm going to try and be short here, but it's important to have the options in mind before we go to the different countries and the different stakeholders that we have invited today to give testimonies of what's happening on the ground. And that's the topic of this presentation. It's not only me. I put some other names on the first slide here. I would like to acknowledge my co-authors from FAO and outside FAO as well. And if you're interested, we put those solutions in this little brochure here. You can find some at the entrance of the room. So before we look into those emissions from livestock and what mitigation is, it's important to remember, as René said, the role of livestock for food security and nutrition. It's a key role. 34% of protein from meat, milk, and eggs, but a bunch of other contributions to, for example, macronutrients, and some of them essentials and that are difficult to find on plant-based diet only, especially for children and pregnant women, as we know now. An important fact to remember is also how livestock produce all those macronutrients and protein as well by using things that we cannot eat as humans, byproducts, crop residues, grass. So turning those unedible products for us into high-quality protein that is edible for us. Their contribution also is to the production of manure for fertilization of crop fields, but also traction, drop power to plow those fields. And livestock products can generate income for families in order to buy food as well. So contribution directly and indirectly to food security and nutrition. Of course, we have to talk about the feed-food competition, which is a negative contribution of livestock to food security. As we know, livestock is using also products that are directly edible, such as cereals. But another indirect contribution is to what we call women empowerment. For example, if you look at the dairy sector, we know that about one farm out of four, one out of 4 dairy farms in the world are led by a woman. And it's very important in food security and nutrition at household level to empower women, as we know. So those emissions, FAO estimates that emissions from livestock supply chains at global level account for about 14% of total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. When we say 14%, we don't only look at enteric methane, the purple part of this chart here, which is the methane released by rumination during the digestive process of livestock, or the emissions from manure, but also the emissions associated with producing the forage and the feed crops, and emissions downstream after the farm gate. So it's really here a life cycle assessment. It's considering all the processes that go into livestock production and what they emit as greenhouse gases. Some scientists from working for the Global Research Alliance, for example, here in this chart, they've looked at the contribution of those emissions to the warming of the atmosphere. So here we have a model increase of temperature according to historical levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And if we remove the enteric methane, we see that we reduce this warming potential. And removing also the 2 other gases, carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide, from the total, we see that, well, the contribution of livestock to the global warming of the Earth is significant. So now looking at the options, what can we do? We have 3 big strategies that we'd like to discuss today. The first one is trying to further increase livestock productivity and the efficiency of farms in using natural resources by using practices and technologies directly that already exist, but also technologies, as we will see, that seek to reduce directly emissions, for example, enteric methane. We're going to look also at soil carbon sinks, in particular in pastures, and how reducing waste and the better integration of livestock in what we call the circular bioeconomy can also contribute to reduce their contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. A fourth strategy is looking at the demand side of the question and reducing meat consumption where it's important, too high, also for health reasons, human health reasons. So we're not going to focus on this today. We're going to focus on the production side. But let's keep in mind that in situations where we have overconsumptions of meat, some reduction can also contribute to environmental benefits and health benefits. So the first option, increasing efficiency, increasing productivity. At FAO, we estimate with our partners that we can reduce emissions from livestock by 20–30% by improving the efficiency of livestock production. And when we look at the history of livestock production, for example, in Asia, we see that it's already the case. Productivity is already increasing, and the emission intensity, this is what we call emissions per kilogram of products, emissions per kilogram of meat or milk, is decreasing over time, as you can see. And well, how can we do that? Using basically best practices and technologies at animal level, but also at herd level. That means, for example, improving the feed quality or chopping some crop residues before feeding them to livestock, better caring for the animals and their health, trying to anticipate animal diseases and treatments, for example. And this is also relevant at herd level. If you have a herd that is more productive, for example, if cows have a higher fertility, then you're more productive at herd level. The important thing is that those options, they're relevant for all systems of production, whether you're a dairy farmer, a poultry farmer, small scale, large scale, you can always improve your productivity. There are very strong synergies between productivity and increasing food security, obviously, but also increasing farmers' incomes and also the overall system resilience. If you produce more with less, you're less vulnerable to climate shocks. One important thing to consider also is that where in cases, in regions where livestock production is relatively static, which is the case, for example, in Europe, to reduce emission intensity per unit of product will result in reducing absolute emissions. But in regions of the world where livestock is growing, and in particular in developing countries, while reducing emission intensity per unit of product will reduce emissions below the level of business as usual, but not overall emissions. So this is important to keep in mind. And we also have direct mitigation options, vaccines against enteric methane emissions, breeding for low methane sheep, for example. They exist, they're available, and there are different levels of implementation at the moment. But this is also high potential options. And just to cite one example of what is being done in practice, FAO is working with the New Zealand Centre for Greenhouse Gas Emissions, funded by the Climate and Clean Air Coalition in 13 countries, in 3 different regions, to, in practice, reduce emissions by improving productivity. The second option, if you remember, was soil carbon sequestration. This is a very specific thing to agriculture, in particular livestock, with the billions of hectares of pasture that livestock is using in the world. Only in the agricultural sector can we think about how we can remove naturally carbon from the atmosphere, and this is a very important options for agriculture to look at. But there are challenges also, because we still have very large gaps of knowledge on how management practices, in particular on pastures, can result in storing more carbon in the soil. For example, restoring the quality of degraded pastures, rotational grazing, integration of pastures and trees. We have case studies at local level, but we still miss the bigger picture, and we're still working on this. The quantification is challenging. We have small changes in carbon stocks versus large, and we have also a problem of persistence. You have to keep implementing those practices if you want the carbon stocks to remain in the soils. And the last option is this story about circular bioeconomy. What do we mean? Well, basically, if you look at the right side of this slide, you see everything that livestock eat. There's a large share of grass and leaves, the green part. You see in yellow also 20% of the dry matter intake of livestock is crop residues, straws, after crop harvest. And those are materials that we cannot eat directly as humans. So the idea behind the circular bioeconomy is to improve, to enhance the share of those materials that we cannot consume as humans in the livestock feed ration. And on the other side, it's also to recycle the energy and the nutrients that are wasted in livestock production to the production of manure when it's not used as fertilizers. So we're thinking here, for example, of biogas production. This integration can happen at different scales. It can happen on farm by using the manure on the crops, by feeding the straw to the livestock, but it can also happen at supply chain level. We can use, for example, the whey, that is a byproduct of the dairy production, to feed pigs, for example. Of course, there are limits to a better integration of livestock in the circular bioeconomy. Some externalities of livestock production are not priced at the moment. There are also some policies that don't help farmers moving into the right direction, that give, like we call, perverse incentives towards using, for example, synthetic fertilizers instead of manure. And there's also a need for adequate policies, especially in the field of public health. So to summarize, I think what we need to remember before we start discussing the different country-level implementation, it's that livestock is very important in the context of climate change, because it's first the source of livelihoods and resilience for hundreds of millions of small farmers and pastoralists who are very much exposed and vulnerable to climate change, but also because livestock is an important contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. We know that low carbon is possible, that solutions exist, and that we already know what they are. Some require a little bit more research for implementation, but they are available. And we also know that most of the time these options also result in reducing the vulnerability of livestock and farmers to climate change. So we have very strong synergies between mitigation and adaptation. And finally, what we know and what we're going to see is that we need concerted action, and that we don't have blanket solutions. We need to use different types of solutions, mix efficiency and carbon storing, for example, as a basket of approach to get the best results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that overview of the range of mitigation options available for livestock. I recall a piece of work done by, I think, CCAF scientists and some folks involved in the GRA that showed that with current known practices, even implemented fully at scale, we can only get to between 21 and 40% of the mitigation required by the agriculture sector as a whole to be consistent with, say, the 2-degree goal of the Paris Agreement. So, you know, I think there's no excuse for us to not adopt the practices we know, given that, as you pointed out, there are so many synergies with farmer income and food security and resilience. But what we certainly need on top of that is more, right? We need more options, not just the sort of the basket of options we know about today. Right, now let's move to the country level. Let's hear from Fabiana from Embrapa, and she'll present to us about options for low-carbon beef production in Brazil. Fabiana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation, Mr. René, and I will try to show you what Brazil is trying to do in a low carbon livestock change, for a better climate change scenario. Okay. Okay, Brazil is one of the most important food producers in the world, and we provide almost 40% of all global beef. In fact, beef supply chain is very important to the country economy, and it's concentrated in the Midwest of Brazil, in the Brazilian Savannah region. About 95% of the herd is raised on pastures of brachiaria grass, and only 3 to 5% of the total amount of beef production comes from intensive systems like feedlot. But what you are really doing to transform the old way of do into a sustainable way of do? Everyone knows that Brazil is one of the more investors on decarbonization of agriculture. Even we have until, although few, situations like this showed in the picture. For example, we have about 69% of all territory covered by forests, natives and cultivated. But we have also about 50-60 million of hectares with degraded pastures that, when recovered, emit less GHG, due also to the less time that cattle stay on the area until slaughter. So, the decarbonization of tropical agriculture grows through the use of the best farming practices, like improved forage, use of calcium, limestone, and nitrogen fertilizers in the pastures, use of crossbreeding, among others. The potential to remove carbon dioxide of the atmosphere only using this practice in Brazil is about 180 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. In the last 3 decades, no model of agricultural production has advanced as fast in the direction of sustainability as the Brazil one. Large part of this change is due to the massive pressuring by his beef buyers, but also by consumers. Curiously, when we talk about GHGs and its effects on the environment, contrary as we could imagine, a recent study made by University of Edinburgh, Scotland Rural College, and Brazil Agricultural Research Corporation, Embrapa, and published in the journal Natural Climate Change, shows that the simplistic approach, less beef for more world sustainability, maybe it's not the right way to cope with the problem in our livestock production systems. All that I said until now is called the tropical sustainable intensification, and Brazil leads a major effort to generate and to promote the use of land-sparing technologies. This is the base for an immigration of the production systems based on their horizontal expansion, common in the past, to a vertical expansion movement. If you take a look for the 7 lines of actuation of the governmental program for the greenhouse gases mitigations, the program ABC, a Brazilian government program, integrated systems is one of that is growing more importance in Brazil. Nowadays, Brazil has about 11.5 million hectares under integrated systems, and Mato Grosso do Sul state, where Embrapa beef cattle is based, has the biggest area with this kind of production systems. One thing that I would like to highlight is that the benefits of these systems go beyond reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I will cite one, thermal comfort, so important to grass-fed beef production in the tropics. In this picture, we can see what I have just talked. Realize that there is a reduction of up to 55% in GHG emissions using a smallest area in this kind of systems. We have a lot of other field studies where we try to know more about the benefits of the use of the integrated systems to produce beef, a sustainable beef. This is a recent study, it has just been published, that shows the LCA of one of the biggest farms of Brazil, Ipameri Farm, that used integrated systems. Here we have a proof that also the producers is open to innovation. Thus, in 2012, after almost 40 years studying the various scenarios and aspects of integrated systems, we launched a brand, a concept brand. The major goal of this initiative is to crystallize in a seal two concepts. One, that you can produce a meat that has its carbon emissions neutralized by the trees of the systems. And two, that all this can be done with a high level of a well-farmed animal. Thus, carbon-neutral Brazilian beef is a new concept for sustainable beef production in the tropics, developed by Embrapa. Actually, it is the only initiative in Brazil for beef production that follows the precepts of MRV mechanism, with measuring, reporting, and verification, essential for the carbon credits market. The carbon-neutral Brazilian beef has initiated at Mato Grosso do Sul state in a pilot project into one of the biggest farms of the state, Grupo Mutum, and nowadays we have other 10 pilot projects over 4 biomes of Brazil. So, it's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabiana. And you've introduced another option, which to me is this decoupling idea. So in addition to the options that Anne presented in terms of increasing productivity and efficiency, direct reductions, reducing waste, and the demand side, we now have this link to land use more broadly with forestry. So I think it's a very important thing to bear in mind. Right, the final speaker for this part of the panel is Mr. Mark Sadler from the World Bank, and he will present to us about investment opportunities in low-carbon livestock in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Mark, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Welcome to Ag Day, which is actually only the second one. The first one was in Morocco. So it's good that we're getting our rightful place on the podium at COP. So it's the second time I've spoken after an astronaut. But it's the first time I've spoken after an astronaut about poop. And really, that's kind of the space that we're in. And very quickly, before talking about, I think the reason the World Bank were asked we would come and talk about money. But just before we get to that, we had some interesting conversations yesterday at the Nordic, at a Nordic event. But I think it's really important that we position livestock and this discussion in the right space. Yes, this is a sector that's accountable for about 14% of total GHG emissions. That's huge. That starts making it look like transport. But when it came to transport, we didn't say people should stop moving around. What we did is we drove a transformation into low-carbon transport. We now have electric vehicles. These things are now in the mainstream. So I urge us all not to get into that conversation, which is we all stop eating meat. Because the reality is that an agricultural sector, sustainable agricultural sector, doesn't work unless there are animals in it. It's an incredibly important part of a functioning ecosystem. And secondly, let's also be very clear about the difference between what is a northern issue and southern potential. So the vast increase in protein consumption that we are seeing is occurring in countries that were and still are developing. And this meat, this protein, is being consumed by people who have suffered from malnutrition for decades and generations. For example, the Mekong Delta, malnutrition incidence in under 5s is over 20%, and that is the rice bowl of the world. But the kids there actually consume 2,000 calories of rice a day. That is not a balanced diet. Of course, munching down on burgers is also not a balanced diet. But I think we do need to be very clear and very careful about excessive consumption, whatever that may be defined as, of animal protein in the north versus the introduction of healthy amounts of animal protein in diets in the south. So it's not a question of don't do it, it's a question of how do we end up with an electric car in livestock? How do we do it better? And speaking after a presentation from Brazil, it's almost a question of, well, what have I got left to say? I mean, Brazil is a phenomenal example with the ABC, the new forest code, and soy moratorium. I mean, the list goes on of how you can actually start moving in that direction. But I think what we're hearing and what we're seeing, and the reality is as well, is that it will take an integrated approach to the problem. It does mean that we need to look at deforestation. It does mean that we need to look at sustainable intensification of livestock as opposed to extensification, which of course is driving the land use change, which we simply cannot as a planet afford. So that being said, I wanted to quickly talk to you about some examples of how at the bank we are starting to move and starting to develop some more integrated approaches to large livestock scale projects and how we're trying to bring together this integration. So the first example, I guess, really came with Niger and Kenya, which were actually coming from climate smart ag projects, but really were seeking to bring in not only different approaches, but also community level up. And Niger and Kenya were actually projects that were designed at the community level up, very much with the local communities deciding on, out of a package of approaches, what would actually make sense and how do you put it together. In that project, we didn't start looking at actual emissions as it related to livestock, but we did actually start including outcome indicators that related to intensity, emissions intensity of livestock production. We've got a large project that's now actually coming together. I'm not going to give any numbers on these ones because these haven't gone to the board yet, but where in the Ethiopia project, we're actually looking at a mitigation target, dangerous word, but a mitigation indicator in livestock under that project, where we're actually looking at a reduction in GHG intensity, emission intensity in livestock of around 30%. As anyone who knows Ethiopia well will appreciate, the fundamental importance of a growing livestock sector for the country, but also the importance, therefore, of doing that in a very sustainable way. It's also the first project where we've actually been able to align both an agricultural investment project, but also the work of one of the biocarbon funds, which happens to be working in our EMEA region. In that situation, we can't actually be looking at carbon payments because at the moment, only absolute emission reductions are considered by most carbon funds. So when we're looking at emission intensity, that wouldn't actually be covered by an emission reduction agreement. But of course, what we're actually doing is we're looking at a situation where business as usual expansion of livestock would actually lead to a dramatic increase in GHG emissions versus the project, which will actually lead to a net increase. That increase will be a lot lower than it would have been if we'd used business as usual. and a new project, in actual fact, in Bangladesh, where it's a very large-scale one, but not only bringing in indicators that relate to GHG emission intensity, but potentially also the ability to connect this with carbon payments. And there the connection's really coming from a challenge that I gave the team about a year ago, which was, sounded a bit crazy to them at the time, but looks like it's now doable, which was give me an off-grid dairy. Access to energy in Bangladesh is an enormous challenge. It's a driver of rural poverty and continued social issues. But as the sector grows and as the demand in Bangladesh grows, especially both for milk and meat, what we are suddenly creating, of course, is a huge energy potential in exactly those places where energy is not currently able to access. And so through the use of biogas and what we've seen in biodigesters is a dramatic change in both the unit cost, but also their efficiency and the reduction in leakage, but also the potential for solar. So what we're really pushing for in Bangladesh is, as we would call it, an off-grid dairy. What that does, of course, is it slightly revolutionizes the situation whereby traditionally dairies and the ability to drive infrastructure and cold chains has been heavily connected to your ability to access energy. Our argument is that the energy's there, we're just not using it. What that actually does is then enable us to start accounting on a project basis, and the Biocarbon Fund actually has and works in exactly that space, where we actually look at a landscape or a jurisdiction, and you start actually accounting across the jurisdiction. And that very much has to be the way that we move forwards with livestock. Because if we're not taking into account the other parts of the system, then we're not truly accounting for livestock in the way that it can and must be done. Because if we do that, we actually start bringing in the incentives, the drivers, and the land use planning that it will require to move livestock forwards. And on that note, I'll let you move on.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for introducing more complexity into the question of livestock. I mean, I think you've raised some really important issues around the ecosystem, the role of animals in those ecosystems, and the energy agriculture interface, which is another option, beyond what Anne's presented, the link to forestry, also thinking about the link between food and energy. Often thinking about it that way doesn't always fit well with the accounting approaches that we're also fond of in this process. So I think it's going to require perhaps some rethinking about how we actually design these projects and what is considered to be legitimate in terms of mitigation. And I think your examples about the business as usual and the intensity type approach is absolutely fundamental to make some progress in agriculture and livestock in particular. Right, so that brings us to the end of this panel session, but I'd like to ask, perhaps rather than dismissing some of our panelists, maybe we just ask the others to join, because I think there is space on the podium. So I'd now like to invite Ruth Hack. She's a sheep farmer from Germany. She had the privilege of working on farms in New Zealand and Australia, and now runs an organic farm. And she represents the German Organization of Shepherds, and will speak for pastoralists here today. Ruth, welcome. Also Maria Sanchez-Maynard from the International Dairy Federation. She's a veterinarian with a PhD in bioengineering sciences, and she works on animal health and welfare, environment and public health for the International Dairy Federation. And finally, but not least, of course, Mr. Fritz Schneider. He's the chair of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. He was a professor on livestock systems at Bern University and extensively involved in major international publications on livestock and environment. So we've heard from, an astronaut. We've heard from international organizations and public sector, and now it's a chance to hear from the livestock sector representatives. I'm going to begin by giving the floor to Ruth. And I'd like to know, well, first of all, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to pose those questions, but also I'd like to hear from you, in terms of being a pastoralist, working with animals, what does this challenge of climate change mean for you, and how can you be sure that your voice is being heard in all this in this conversation, the likes of which we hear in Bonn? Thank you.
Thank you. To give a voice to the pastoralists. I'm a German shepherd, and if you go out and see a shepherd with his herd in the field, it might seem first very romantic, and it might give the impression that's a backward thing. But really, it's a very modern thing, because in order to go long distances with our animals to find the food, we are used to adapt always to new situations, so we can adapt to the climate change. But in German, a shepherd can't live from his income of the sheep. 30 years ago, we could. But now, a sheep, if I sell a lamb, it hardly covers the costs to keep the mother sheep. Now, the income is one part money from the EU, which all farmers get, and another part is local money to keep the environment. But this is not enough to encourage young people to go ahead with this way of life. The average of a shepherd in Germany and also in Europe is 56 years. So if the things doesn't change in about 10 years, there will be a big change. We should be paid for our services because we are agroecological service providers. We keep the landscape, we keep the biodiversity, and we produce good meat where no machine can go. And this is for the sheep in Germany. This is for the camels in India. And for all the others, for the yaks in the Himalaya, for the reindeer near the North Pole, for the cows in Africa. We all feed our animals on grass where no machine can harvest and where no machine can go, and on grass and leaves where no person can eat. And the climate change adds another problem to what we have here in Germany, to our bureaucracy and the predators which are coming. But we can face it if it is an income for our families. So what would mean climate change for the others in Europe and the world? There the situation is much more dramatic. In many parts of the world, the access to land and water for the pastoralists is getting less and less. And also the migration routes are cut off, and they can't go where they have to go to feed their animals. And as the climate changes, they even have to go more distances to find food, to find the necessary food to feed their animals. And if they can't, the pastoralists don't have enough income, and very often they even don't have enough to eat. And how can we get our voice heard? First thing is to organize ourselves. This can be on the local level. In Germany, we've been going together, the German shepherds in the German Shepherd professional, the German Shepherd professional. A few years ago, we get together in an organization. So we got more attention in policy, and more attention also in the media, in the newspapers, radio, and TV. And that was a great progress for us, because before, sometimes, we seem to be very often forgotten. And another thing what we are doing is to go together on the European level, because most laws are made in Brussels, and there are much laws to take away the rights, our rights, and yes. And we have also too much bureaucracy. And we need less regulations. And the next thing to do is to give the European Shepherd Network a legal form, and we need the support to do this the next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth, and some really good examples there, building on what Mark mentioned about the role of livestock and ecosystems, absolutely clear in your presentation. And also the issue of the age of farmers. I think you said 56 years average age in Germany. It wouldn't be much different in New Zealand, perhaps even older, and the same in many countries, which is an issue facing the sector for sure. Okay, now I'd like to ask Maria to address us. Maria, as far as I understand, the International Dairy Federation represents about 3/4 of global milk production. I'd like to hear what the Sustainable Development Agenda means for IDF, and also what IDF can do or is doing to contribute to making possible this low emissions livestock future that we're talking about today. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, as you said, the dairy industry represents 1 billion people, and there are 6 billion consumers of dairy products. So last year, in 2016, the dairy sector committed itself, together with the FAO, to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by signing the Dairy Declaration. This Dairy Declaration has now been signed by 20 IDF member countries, and we expect that many more are going to sign it. The goal of the dairy sector is to continuously improve and to deliver for healthy people and on a healthy planet, working on livelihoods, on nutrition, on the environment, working on the economies, on women empowerment. We are aware that the climate change is there. We are responsible for methane emissions and as well for manure. And we are also being affected by climate change. So the dairy cattle is affected currently mainly because of heat stress. We are suffering decreased milk yields. Of course, it affects cow comfort. We have most pests and diseases. The dairy feed supply is affected as well, and it is also getting more difficult to manage the manure in heat and warm extreme conditions. So the dairy sector is fully aware of the climate change and is really committed to reduce the emissions. And this is what we have done with the Dairy Declaration. And I'm just going to brief you what we are doing. So there are currently many initiatives already in place in many regions and countries. For example, there's an industry-wide approach, voluntarily taken by many dairy industries. For example, in the US, the dairy industry has committed itself to reduce 25% of greenhouse emissions by 2020 from the baseline of 2007. And many other countries are doing the same. I work for the International Dairy Federation, which is a science-based organization that supports the dairy sector and helps the dairy sector progress. One of the pillars of our work is dairy sustainability. And currently, the dairy sector is at the forefront on aligning on carbon footprint calculations. With the work of experts, scientific experts in the IDF, we publish a document as a guide that allows the dairy sector to measure the carbon footprint of dairy products. This document is aligned with many other standards that are in place, and as well with the work of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, with the LEAP project coordinated by the FAO, and it is also aligned with the Dairy Sustainability Framework This is an initiative of which IDF is one of the member founders. We are also working a lot in water, because we know that water is essential to life and it's also essential for farming, and our aim is to reduce the water use. So we have recently also published a guidance document for the dairy sector to calculate the water footprint of products. So it helps the users to identify hotspots of water use and to measure some progress indicators on water use and consumption. We are also working on biodiversity, because we are aware that dairy affects biodiversity. And from the IDF, we are trying to help the dairy sector understand how dairy is having an impact on the biodiversity. How can we stay within the ecological limits of the landscape, and as well how dairy can benefit the ecosystems, because this is possible. We also have some projects in the IDF, in the Federation, to optimize the environmental performance at processing and at transport level. And we are also aware that we need to work on carbon soil sequestration, and this needs it warrants more research on this. So overall, I just can say that the dairy sector is fully committed to achieve nutrition, to provide nutrition in a sustainable manner to nourish the world, and that we are fully aware of climate change and of the possibilities and options for mitigation.
Thank you, Maria, and we certainly need the likes of IDF and other industry organisations to be absolutely leading in this challenge. Fritz, I'll turn to you now. You're chair of a multi-stakeholder platform, so you're working with the government representatives, you're working with civil society, and you're working with industry bodies in that platform. Maybe you can share with us some of the action and sort of efforts that you're seeing from that platform on the ground, and the contribution those actions are making to reducing emissions from livestock, but also contributing to that broader sustainable development agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Before I answer directly the question, maybe I put the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock into context. FAO is a group, a rather informal group called the Livestock and Environment in Development Group, started its work in the late 90s and came out with a publication, Livestock's Long Shadow, in 2005, which showed the greenhouse gas emissions, and that created a lot of havoc in the livestock sector because many people thought it was too negative. Then this work went on to 2010, when the Committee of Agriculture of FAO asked FAO to develop a global agenda for sustainable livestock. And I have the honor to chair this agenda now, and I'm very happy to show you a little bit what we are doing. It's actually a voluntary organization. We now have over 100 members. There are governments, the civil society, NGOs, academia research, but also multinational institutions and UN organizations like the FAO and World Bank are members. The guidance is within these clusters I just mentioned, but the work actually is done by action networks. We have many action networks where technical work is being done, science-based evidence is created. I will not mention all of them, but we have one closing the efficiency gap. We have one restoring value to grassland. We have a global network on silvopastoral systems, a Dairy Asia Partnership for Health and Prosperity, and recently we also have added an animal welfare action network and action network on livestock antimicrobial partnership. The Global Agenda of Sustainable Livestock has linked its work very closely to the SDGs. That was done a year ago in Panama. And when we now look what this agenda can do, it provides this platform to share knowledge and to document and communicate cases of best practices and tools. We also develop and test and make available tools and guidelines to measure practice change. A person recently in a presentation said you can't improve what you can't measure. So I think measurements are very important. And also engage in regional national policy debates with decision makers to facilitate the development and implementation of enabling policies and enhance interactions with science and other related multi-stakeholder partnerships like, for instance, the GRA. When we now look for examples, what is happening maybe due to the work of the global agenda, we have to become more active regionally and also locally. So, for instance, Mongolia as a country has joined the global agenda and now has started activities to create a national agenda for sustainable livestock, realizing that it is not enough to develop a national livestock policy. This livestock policy has to be enhanced by a multi-stakeholder approach. Another example, the Action Network Dairy Asia is making use of the global agenda principles to sustainably develop the dairy sector in Asia. And in Asia, we are talking mostly with smallholders. The Action Network for Silvopastoral System is showcasing practice change in Latin America and makes it available to other agroclimatic zones. The publications of the Livestock Environment Assessment Partnership, it has already been mentioned, have proven to assist extension services and farmers to reduce their environmental impact and at the same time save money for those impacts. There are many more examples, but I think I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Fritz. So now the floor is open to you. You've been listening patiently for an hour or so. We have 10 minutes until the next session begins. So let's say 5 minutes for questions from the floor to any of the panelists. Matthew, I see your hand. Perhaps, I'm not sure how to manage this, if there are microphones or someone could pass microphones around, if you could identify yourself and to whom you're asking your question. Thank you. First of all, Matthew, ready from... yeah, I guess there, or maybe there are some roving mics we can pass you on here. There's another one.
Thank you, Hayden, and thank you to all of the presenters. Matthew Reddy from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Brilliant presentations, and I really like the way that, especially the presenter from Embrapa, talked about the systems approach to thinking beyond the cow and into the landscape, and hopefully we can hear more about that. What I was really interested in is we talk about food, we talk about protein. What we don't talk about is agricultural value chains. Everyone in this room is wearing wool. Everyone in this room is wearing leather. The alternatives to this could be far worse for climate change. So I think we need to expand this conversation much more into the value that livestock brings to more circular solutions for other sectors of the economy and sustainable production as well, beyond protein and protein and food.
Good point. Sorry. Any more? Yes, in the centre. Yeah.
It's on. Okay. I'm Paulo Barreto. I'm from Brazil. Fabiana mentioned the system of carbon neutral beef. I would like to know what are the main challenges to scale up. You mentioned there are pilot projects, but of course it's small. What are the challenges to scale up this experience? Thank you.
Okay, I will be talk after, but I talk also now. The big challenge is to bring the private sector to us. Is to combine the scientific research with the private sector goals in Brazil, because Brazil is a large country and we have several biomes and all the types of soils and trees and the others, and the production systems, it's also various. We don't have a particular production beef systems, and we have a lot of breeds and a lot of soils and a lot of logistic problems. And we are trying to overspread this kind of brand. It's a brand, and we are trying with research and with partners, with a private partners, and also with the support of the government.
Thank you. Here in the front, please.
Yes. Hello, thanks for very nice presentations. My name is Nahid Naqizadeh from Iran, from a civil society organization, Senesta, Center for Sustainable Development. We are working in Iran with mobile indigenous peoples and local communities over decades. And special thanks to the representative of pastoralists from Germany for being a voice of those communities. Unfortunately, in Iran, 2% of the people are nomadic pastoralists, but the policies are tries to sedentarize those communities. And their territories has been taken by development projects. And I wonder if there are some international policies to enforce the national levels to support those communities as they have mobility. And if they sedentarize them, then we have to rely on industrial livestock. What is the international mechanisms to support those communities at national level and local level? Thank you so much.
Anne, do you want to have a attempt, or Mark?
I can say a few words on this. Thank you for the question, a very relevant question, and for a good follow-up to Ruth's intervention. The mobility of pastoralists is at stake at the moment, and it's challenged by a number of things: crop encroachment, conflicts, land degradation, and so on. And this is a topic that in FAO we are working on. We know that, for example, I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, the Nouakchott Declaration was mentioning this problem and trying to create an international movement around this issue. We also have an initiative called the Pastoralist Knowledge Hub, working on mobility issues at the moment, supported by FAO. For example, next week we will have a conference in Dakar, dealing especially with this problem of mobility, where we're trying to bring together scientists and policymakers in order to tackle the issue of mobility and how to support pastoralists continue with their traditional lifestyle and livelihoods and adapting to new challenges. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you, Anne. I think we have 2 more questions, the 2 standing at the microphones, and then we'll have to draw it to a close, I'm afraid. So please, in the center.
Hi, my question is for Fabiana. I'm from an NGO called Brighter Green in Brooklyn, New York. I would like to know how the emissions and data is going to be tracked for this no carbon beef you're talking about. I went to an event, the Brazil Pavilion yesterday, where the NGOs were saying that they were not able to access information on emissions and farm data. So I'd like to know about that. And very quick point to the gentleman who mentioned clothing. I'm wearing a intentionally animal-free recycled material made in New York City coat and a bamboo scarf. And so I realize these are not options for everyone around the world, but I think a lot of people in this room can have access to these kind of materials. So it's very possible to not wear animals.
Okay, thank you for the question. We have a guideline, a protocol to do this this brand, and this brand is a concept brand that we have about 40 years of studies in the gas emissions in this kind of systems. These are zero pastoral systems mainly. and we use for the calculus of the emission and of the mitigation, we use or the IPCC levels for the emissions of the cattle, or our studies, because we have our results of our studies, because we have a big net in Brazil called, we have 3 big nets called Fluxus, Pecus, and I don't remember the other, sorry. But we work very hard in a Pecus net that is official governmental research that involves more than 1,000 institutes and institutions, and we measure the emissions from the cattle, from the soil, from the trees, from the systems, from the cultivations, and we have these results. The results, it's published in the several journals, and we have also in our website at Embrapa. You can find www.embrapa.br, and you can find the results of these studies. And we use these results, or IPCC when we don't have this date.
Mark, you wanted to make a quick...
Yeah, just a very quick comment, because I think it's another example of kind of how technology can disrupt what we currently perceive to be. So the example was raised of leather and clothing, and the lady made a very good remark about, okay, but this is from recycled materials, etc. But about 6 months ago, there was a fundamental tech breakthrough in the US to actually be able in laboratories to produce leather without an animal. And now, not only does that mean you don't have an animal and the issues of how we manage animals in a humane way, but it also gets to the efficiency of the leather clothing industry and the car industry, where currently, because leather comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes from different shaped animals, there's an enormous amount of wastage. But with this line production system, you can just produce it to exactly the size that you wanted and no animals involved, but it's still leather. So, there's a huge tech disruption going on around us. And I'd encourage us all to keep on going back to what exists outside of the ag sector for solutions that can be delivered inside the food sector and the clothing industry.
Very good observation. Final question from the floor, and the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Travis Frank from Climate Interactive. My question is sort of maybe for the panel, since I think this is hard to quantify. Some of you made comments like this, but my question for your expert opinion is, what are emissions, absolute emissions, going to be in 2050 for the sector? In particular, Anne made the comment of when intensity reduces, but the overall absolute amount of livestock increases, which we're expecting globally, that the absolute emissions go up. So are we going to be 10% higher than today, 30% reduction below BAU? Can someone, what are your opinions about what we can really do?
Anne?
Thank you for the question. So the figures that everybody's using at the moment for what will be the size of the sector in 2050 is about plus 70% compared to 2005. This is the reference figure from FAO published in 2012. We are now working on revised estimates, and we believe they will be lower than this, so we would probably be under plus 50% in our projections for how big the livestock sector will be in 2050 compared to let's say 2010 now. This means that if we, this is the business as usual, if no progress is made, we'll have plus 50% of emissions, but we know that progress is being made already, has been made in the past, and if the current pace of improvements continues, we can expect emissions to rise by 20-30% max. And that's without considering all the new progress that we mentioned today, without considering carbon storage in soils. It's very difficult to give an absolute figure now, but we know that we are on the right path, and that we can even improve this, and maybe become carbon neutral in the livestock sector as a whole if we combine all those solutions.
Great, thank you very much, Anne. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. I'd like to thank the panelists for their excellent contributions and for being with us today. Another, maybe a round of applause for all of them, for their sharing their expertise and their experiences. I think just for a quick summary, what I'd like to highlight is what we've heard today is, I think the sheer diversity of livestock production systems make the challenge we have so enormous, and I think we have challenges of scale, both in the terms of the extensive nature of much of our production systems, but also that much of the world's production is from small scale production, small holders I should say, which creates its own challenges around having the scale of resources necessary to implement some of these practices. We've heard about the diversity of systems in Brazil, but that's just one country. You know, the different soil types, the different climates, the different animal species, all around the world in our livestock systems are so diverse, and each have their own specific challenges. Then there's the cultural practices of how we manage our livestock and the value that livestock have in societies around the world. We've heard about the role of livestock, both from I guess a contribution towards driving climate change in terms of its contributions to greenhouse gas emissions, but also the very important role livestock play, and probably the fundamental role livestock play in actually providing food, fibre, fuel, draft, and other services to societies. We've heard about nutrition, malnutrition, obesity, etc., and the role livestock play in each of those challenges. We've heard about the impacts of climate change on livestock, which makes our task even more difficult to actually create more productive and resilient livestock systems. And we had a question earlier from René about, you know, can we have this low-carbon livestock future? Well, I think the answer is we must. We know that a lot can be done. We've heard from the government representatives, the scientific community, our multilateral institutions, our representatives from the livestock sector. A lot of action is taking place. Of course we need more. We need scaling up, or I think it's called nowadays scaling out. I don't know when that happened, but it changed. And the role of the private sector, and I guess where I come from, farmers are the private sector, and I sometimes wonder why we separate farmers and then the private sector. But we certainly need those actors who are actually producing food and fibre and energy and draft and everything else to be the ones taking action, and they need support. And that's not just money, that's knowledge, that's policy settings. I mentioned earlier that with the known practices, we think we can get about maximum 40% of the way in terms of what livestock should contribute as part of that 2-degree goal. So we need innovation, we need breakthrough, we need disruptive technologies that Mark mentioned in terms of producing leather or a leather substitute without having animals involved. So, I think we need all of us to be working hand in hand to make this future possible. And so with that, I'll stop, and I'll just maybe invite, closing the circle, thinking about circular food systems, to our first speaker. Thomas, you mentioned, from 450 kilometres away, how fragile Earth is and how we're protected by a very thin bubble of blue that you could pop with a pin, it seems, from the space station. What you've heard today, are you leaving here with more confidence about the future, or are you leaving perhaps wanting to go back to the space station?
No, I am. I'm reassured by the conversation. It's good to know that solutions exist, are being implemented, that other solutions are being considered. Of course, there are still lots of problems that we've discussed today extensively, but I have a good confidence, I think, that when I go back to space, if I do one day, then I'll see the change in action from the very local solutions to the global result at the scale of the planet.
Great. Well, thank you. Let's hope we can achieve it. Thank you, everyone.